You got this!
Hi, this is the Professional Amateur Hour coming to you with another review. This week, Leo sent me Roadhead, which is a 2020 film, which I think is dropping to VOD soon, and it is directed by David Del Rio and stars Elizabeth Grullon and Damian Joseph Quinn, among others. The story of this one is that there's three friends who go to this lake for a little picnic or whatever. However, the lake is all dried up because, climate change and whatnot. So it's just a dry lake bed, but they still decide to have a little walk there and hang out for a little bit. But then they are surprised by this deadly sword slasher and who chases them all over the place and whatnot and steals their car and that type of stuff. And then they have to fight to survive. What will happen exactly? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. Alright, so let's talk about what works with this film. Well, I think this film is pretty unique among the slasher genre, particularly because of the setting. It's such a beautiful setting. I know it's just a dried up lake bed, but you can just see for miles and miles, or kilometers and kilometers. And I think it's just a wonderful setting. It does have its issues though, like how can you sneak up on someone when you can see in every direction for miles? They do kind of get past that, if you're taking a nap, someone can walk up to you. If you're, high on some drugs, you can not notice someone walking up to you. And once it gets to night, that's much more plausible as well. There are a few situations where, they just like come in off the right side of the screen. And you think, why didn't they just look off screen and then they could have seen the killer? But that is not like the commonplace way that the killer sneaks up on them. So I do find it to be quite a unique place, particularly for the setting. It's just such a beautiful setting, very cool to see. Even though they had this like wonderful scenery, it still looked like there was like a few kind of green screen shots. They're very like slight and it's just like that little outline. But I like green screen stuff as well. So I really enjoyed all the scenery. It was beautiful. The pacing of this movie is also pretty good. There's always something happening. They're always running away from the sword slasher. There's always, them bickering and yelling at each other. Something's always happening, so I definitely appreciate that. It was faster paced. It definitely helped because it did move along, and if you did find something kind of outrageous, there was always something coming up that you could be distracted by. It's definitely one of those films where the plot is just kind of like turn your brain off fun, but there's other issues with it too. So let's talk about those issues. So what doesn't work in this film? Well, I think the two main characters were poorly written. Not the actor's fault. I love the acting. The acting was perfectly fine. It's how they were written. I like diversity in my movies. And this is certainly a diverse, leading pair, right? You have a female of color and then you have a gay guy as your main leads here. But I think they are written as caricatures of, caricatures of who they're supposed to represent, right? You're supposed to have a strong female lead, but I think the writer has confused strength with insulting everyone around you and trying to, put everyone down. That's not really where strength comes from. And the gay guy is kind of overly flamboyant, and it even like affects like how he sneaks and stuff, and everything he does is flamboyant, to the point of, being a mockery of the character. And so I did have a problem with that. I tried to like them as much as possible, but in the end I just kind of turned my brain off and, went for a ride with these characters just to find out where they would end up. In this movie, somebody said something early on that really kept with me throughout the whole movie. And it's this part where there's this one guy, he wants to be an arty photographer, and the other person is mocking him because he put a bowl of cereal on Instagram and the caption was boobspiration. And he says, oh no, I'm trying to be ironic. I'm trying to do a self-parody of myself. And that just kind of stuck with me because it is labeled as a comedy, but there's no, direct jokes written. It is kind of this parody aspect of it where they're just kind of being ridiculous sometimes, but it's never like heavy-handed. It's never that self-aware. It's always like they are trying to make a serious film always. So even though it's listed as a comedy, it's not particularly funny. I did laugh a few times, but really that was when it clearly became a self-parody at some points. You know, I thought it was actually supposed to be a stoner comedy when it started, because like they're smoking weed and stuff, but then they have none of those jokes where, you know, they're smoking weed with the slasher or anything. There's none of that. It's really that self-parody aspect of it. And I found that it's not heavy-handed. It's very light on the comedy, and it's also light on the horror as well. And I did find that took away from this excellent scenery and kind of like the shot trickery, the cinematography and everything else. So I would count that as a negative. I gotta say, I did like the main slasher, the sword slasher. I'm not sure what they're calling him, but his bosses are just like a self-parody to the max. Like once you start seeing them on screen, you start laughing. There's no doubt about it. It just becomes a self-parody. And lastly, I gotta say, for a movie called Roadhead, a bunch of dicks get bitten. So who is this movie for exactly? Well, I think if you're a fan of slasher films, it's one of those turn your brain off and watch something happen. If you watch a lot of movies, you can definitely just turn your brain off and go with the flow and go for a ride with these characters, even if you aren't particularly fond of them. If you are, you know, one of those represented demographics with the main characters, maybe if you're a woman of color, not very well written. It plays up to typical tropes. If you're a gay guy, maybe it's a little bit of a characterization of like the effeminate gay guy, but you could watch it if that's your thing. As for a rating, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. But what did you think? Are you planning on watching it? Leave us a comment telling us about it. As always, like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.